A recent poll by The Economist showed a near even split among people on whether Donald Trump urged his supporters to engage in violence. And joining us now to talk about the impact that this is having on our political landscape is Dr. Suzanne Chadha, political science professor at North Central College. Professor, thanks for being with us once again here. This polling has found a lot of astounding responses here. You heard that one there, but 26% surveyed said that the riot was an act of patriotism. Many who believe that it wasn't Trump supporters who, were behind this violence. How do you think that kind of disinformation has taken such deep root?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that those of us who study American politics, and particularly political scientists who study democracies and how democracies erode and fray, are very concerned about. That, conspiracy theories are nothing new. They do take hold in democracies even. But I think what's most concerning is that the loudest part of one of the parties, the Republican Party, is using these conspiracy theories as a way to say that those are the true facts, and it's not the actual facts that we know and the things that we have come to know about what happened on the 6th and who was there and why. And so, particularly today, when most Republicans were nowhere to be found at the Capitol talking about this, but the ones who were espousing these conspiracy theories, that the more this happens, the more that one party continually talks about delegitimizing democracy and the pillars of democracy, then the more dangerous it becomes for us to protect that democracy.
In his speech today, President Biden said it was Trump's bruised ego that he valued over the Constitution. My question is, do you think Americans can find a way to unite at some point in the future, given all the division that exists today?
If you would have asked me this before January 6th of 2021, I may have had a different question, but I honestly believe that we are worse off now a year later than we were then. And part of it is exactly what you just described, is this deep division. And even though President Biden came in saying he'd be this great unifier, how deep and how profound these divisions are, where we have one half of the American people who believe in democracy and the other half who some believe that a military coup could happen or that there'd be a violent overthrow of the government in order to take it back for them, the rightful owners of it. And I think one of the things, and Vice President Harris talked about it today, and some of the people that were just in the interviews that you just showed, is to protect voting rights. That to keep people from voting is one of the ways we see democracies slide the fastest. And we have a group of politicians in one party in particular that wants to take those rights away in order to make sure that they are the ones that have power. And so when those divides are at every level, it's really hard to see a way forward. And I wish I had a better answer of how we do it. But I think the biggest thing is just to be engaged, pay attention, and vote.
Dr. Chadha, in the polling here, I did find this positive, that 71% do believe that Congress should continue its investigation. Depending on the result that it finds here, do you think that will work toward healing?
I wish that I could say yes. And the reason that I'm hesitant is that just today we saw 2 Republican members of the House of Representatives, Representative Gates and Representative Taylor Greene, talk about the way they think the investigation should go if they take power after the next midterm. And that's to actually investigate the FBI and the Justice Department for orchestrating the insurrection, as opposed to the individuals who did perpetuate the insurrection. And so whatever this particular committee finds, those that are in control of it, there will be some people who believe everything that is said and others who think that it is just more government conspiracy trying to take power away from people. And I think no matter whatever comes out of this particular commission is going to be important to know for a lot of us of what was done ahead of time and who. And I hope that that's where we can go forward, as opposed to following on conspiracy theories.
Dr. Suzanne Chadha at North Central University. Good to see you again. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
You as well. Take good care.
All right, you too.